Before we get started, I want to just tell you a little bit about AGRA Watch and about how these films came about. So AGRA Watch is a campaign of Community Alliance for Global Justice, or CAGJ. CAGJ was founded in Seattle by organizers who participated in the 1999 World Trade Organization protests and who wanted to continue mobilizing opposition to neoliberal policies and raising awareness of their effects both locally and across borders. So we founded AGRA Watch as a campaign of CAGJ in the early aughts when we learned about the Gates Foundation's creation of AGRA, formerly the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, and now kind of a standalone acronym as a result of an enormous amount of pressure that basically brought light to how bad the Green Revolution is. And so they removed that from their name as kind of a PR approach. So we were alarmed at the time by what the Gates Foundation and AGRA were doing in promoting this very industrial agriculture, corporate-led green revolution approach in Africa. And so we created this campaign to organize in solidarity with the African food sovereignty movement and with folks on the ground who were seeing the effects of this kind of push for the green revolution firsthand. So together with our partners, including the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, with whom we made these films, we have fought against the imposition of this green revolution, and we have instead promoted and uplifted sustainable alternatives, including agroecology. So the Gates Foundation has one of the largest endowments of any private philanthropy in history, but its decisions about how it spends its vast wealth are often celebrated and very rarely questioned. Similarly, AGRA often receives unquestioning support, cementing ties with major funding agencies like USAID, for example, the US Agency for International Development, and investment funds, even as it goes against what many African farmers want and are demanding and have been demanding for many years. And journalists, by and large, have not covered critical reports on this. And until recently, the wider public generally regarded the Gates Foundation with admiration for helping, quote unquote, helping people in the global South. So we wanted to create Rich Appetites to tell a story that needs more coverage about how billionaire philanthropists are pushing US-style industrial agriculture around the globe, including in Africa, against the will of the people. But the story is not only about the danger of the foundation's approach and its failures to address hunger or address climate change. It's also about the resilience of African small-scale farmers and the hope that the food sovereignty movement and that agroecology represent for all of us and for our planet. We would love for our audience to be able to dive into the accompanying materials that we've produced for the film as well. So on the film website, richappetitesfilm.com, you can find annotated scripts for all the films, as well as companion guides, which go a little bit deeper into the research behind each film. So those are online. Under each film, there's a link to the companion guide, and you can also view them there as a Google Doc or as a PDF if you prefer. We'd also like to thank Greenhouse Cartoons, the South African animation studio, who did a wonderful job translating our big visions and ideas into the design of these films. And we'd like to thank the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa for co-producing and co-developing this series with us. And finally, we want to thank everyone who participated in the films in any way, and especially those who provided interviews for the films, including some of the speakers with us today. So with that, I will turn it over to the film, and then after that, we'll hear from our panelists and have a bit of time for Q&A.
On the farm today, wherever you look, you see the handiwork of scientists. Improved crops, more productive soils, more useful, more efficient machinery.
Over the last century, government policies, big infrastructure, and corporations have forced US farmers into a vicious cycle of expensive inputs, low crop prices, and increasing debt. Faced with mounting pressures, many farmers have had to sell their land. Rural landscapes have shifted from a mosaic of small family farms to large-scale industrial operations, many owned by agribusiness companies. Yields of commodity crops like wheat, corn, and soy have increased, but at what cost? Excessive use of fertilizers and pesticides has exposed farm workers, often immigrants, to dangerous chemicals and has caused toxic runoff, contaminating water sources and creating dead zones. Industrial agriculture has become the largest single cause of biodiversity loss worldwide, harming the ecosystems we all rely on for survival. And higher yields haven't meant that everyone can access the food that they need. Over 35 million people in the US, 10.5% of households, were food insecure in 2019, experiencing a lack of reliable and consistent access to food. At the same time, over a third of Americans suffer from health problems caused by the food they eat. And at the end of the day, roughly a third of the US food supply ultimately ends up at a landfill. This is a broken system. Yet, it was exported as a model for a green revolution in Asian and Latin American countries, where it led to long-term economic and social strain in rural areas, pushed many small-scale farmers off of their land, and had negative environmental effects. And it is now being exported to Africa. The Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa has pushed African farmers to adopt the American way of farming by promoting commercial seeds, chemical fertilizers, pesticides and weed killers, and focusing on commodity crops like corn. The Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA, was created in 2006 by the Gates and Rockefeller Foundations with the aim of improving and modernizing African agriculture. AGRA promised to double crop productivity and the incomes of 20 million smallholder farming families, while cutting food insecurity in half in 20 countries by 2020. After 15 years and over $1 billion spent, AGRA has failed. Productivity gains have remained at the same level as they were pre-AGRA. Farmers have taken on debt they can't pay back, and hunger increased by 30% in AGRA's focus countries.
I did a lot of research in Ethiopia, and previously, some 7 or 8 years ago, I don't know, Ethiopian farmers using glyphosate, Roundup. Now they are using it. It's having a lot of impact on their health. And the pesticides are having a huge impact on African farmers and African consumers in general, and African people. I think the biggest problem is dependency. They would be locked into a system. You have to give it artificial fertilizer and also the pesticides to operate. That's dependency.
Philanthropic organizations like the Gates Foundation, the largest private charitable foundation in the world, are trying to apply business principles to solve complex social problems. This is called philanthrocapitalism. In the case of African agriculture, it is furthering the interests of corporations and harming African farmers and communities, while claiming to advance the humanitarian goal of feeding the world.
And so one thing we're announcing today that we're very enthusiastic about is a software donation of over $10 million of software.
Meet Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft and one of the world's richest people. His foundation's charitable work has earned him a reputation as a brainiac do-gooder, trying to make the world a better place. But is it really charity? Over the past 17 years, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has spent about $6 billion on agriculture, claiming to help smallholder farmers in the global south, mainly in Africa. But the majority of grant money earmarked for African agricultural development has gone to institutions in the US and Europe. Of the money that has made it to Africa, 80% went to three main groups. AGRA, a US-registered agency that promotes industrial agriculture in Africa. The AATF, which acts as a broker between foreign agribusiness companies and African scientists and policymakers to develop and expand the use of genetically modified crops. And institutes that belong to the CGIAR, an international network of public agricultural research centers, many founded in the 1960s and 1970s amid efforts to impose industrial agriculture on farmers in the global south. Although these organizations may be based in Africa, many of their programs partner with large agribusiness companies in the US and Europe that want to expand into African markets.
The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has put in a lot of money on organizations like the 1 Acre Fund, where they invested $11.6 million. That's about 1.1 billion Kenyan shillings. And the idea is that every technology that is seed has to be accompanied by fertilizers, has to be accompanied by specific pesticides and herbicides. And a lot of the 1 Acre Fund farmers have actually gone into debt, and it has not helped as much as was foreseen.
But let's back up. How did Gates get all of this money to begin with? Born into a wealthy Seattle family, Bill Gates co-founded Microsoft in 1975. The company's success was partly due to innovation, but an even bigger factor was an aggressive, monopolistic business strategy that suppressed competition and ensured the company's dominance. Gates then channeled billions of dollars in profits into his foundation, benefiting from US laws that allow the wealthy to not pay taxes on money used for charitable causes, as long as 5% of it is given away. In the 1990s and early 2000s, some seemingly charitable donations actually helped Microsoft get new customers. Now, the Gates Foundation is helping agribusiness corporations get African farmers to use their products by using similar tactics of charity and donations to lock in new customers. The foundation funds AGRA's work convincing farmers to adopt industrial farming practices. It funds AATF and AATF's Open Forum on Agricultural Biotechnology, or OFAB, to lobby African regulators and pave the way for foreign biotech companies to enter the market. It funded the creation of the African Biosafety Network of Expertise, which influences policy and legislation and has helped lay the groundwork for field trials of genetically modified crops produced by Monsanto and other companies. And its funding created the Cornell Alliance for Science, a journalist training program that aggressively pushes pro-GMO propaganda. As of 2022, the Gates Foundation's endowment is worth over $50 billion. That's higher than the GDPs of 3/4 of the countries in Africa. With this financial clout, the Gates Foundation is one of the most powerful forces influencing agricultural development in Africa and the world.
We've seen a usurping of policy space by these philanthrocapitalists, as well as the US government, because the resources direct how policy is made and what goes into policy. We have yet to even see the African Union's policy and position on food systems that they said they presented to the UN Food System Summit. Everything is untransparent, cloak and dagger.
You find that AGRA and organizations that are funded by Gates Foundation get easier access to government than other organizations like my own. They're listened to before we even get any admission.
The foundation has also played an outsized role in influential bodies of the United Nations, including the Committee on World Food Security, and its spending has shifted the priorities of large taxpayer-funded development agencies toward an even stronger focus on agribusiness. In spite of its international influence, rivaling or in some cases even eclipsing that of elected governments, the foundation answers to no one but its trustees, Bill Gates, Melinda French Gates, and other people in their inner circle. For decades, the Gates Foundation has used untaxed money, supposedly set aside for charitable uses and the public good, to grow corporate bottom lines and create markets for companies advancing crop biotechnology, agrochemicals, and digital agriculture. This is not charity. The supposed beneficiaries of the foundation's programs, African farmers and farmer associations, have vocally opposed this approach to agriculture, citing the harm these investments have caused to farmers and ecosystems. Instead, they have demanded more funding for agroecology, rooted in principles of food sovereignty, a food system designed for and by the people. Rather than supporting what these farmers want, the Gates Foundation has spent billions of dollars remaking African agriculture as a business ripe for new investments.
They've targeted, for example, harmonization of seed biotech investment laws because they want the continent to be a seamless trading post. And this is kind of a new wave of neocolonialism of our food system.
This is a traditional maize variety, cultivated and adapted by farmers over many generations. A seed company takes it and invests in research to make it produce a protein that can ward off unwanted insects. Then they patent, advertise, and sell it as a so-called improved variety. To be able to do this, companies need countries to adopt laws that allow seeds to be patented and privately owned. And in some cases, these laws make it so that only patented seeds can be sold on the market. Seed privatization laws are popping up all over Africa, imposing intellectual property protections designed by rich countries who stand to benefit the most.
The Plant Variety Protection Bill, it was a bill that was proposed that will enable Ghana to pass a law that makes it possible for Ghana to join the International Union for Plant Variety Protection, the UPOV 91. Then you are obliged to go by a set of very rigid laws for seeds. Laws that protect seeds that are patented by seed producers. And these laws have a lot of negative effects on our small farmers. Our local seeds, number one, is available to all farmers. You don't need to buy it. In fact, my father was a farmer, and I don't remember us going to buy seed. Anytime of the farming season, go to your uncle there, I need this seed, I don't have enough. Give him some. Go to this, my friend here, you can get some. I have excess, if you want, you can also come and take. This was how seed was available. They shared. And then there was not ashamed to ask from your relatives. And this is how they did it. But a new protection law now promotes a certain type of seed. They call it formal seed. That what I said was the informal seed system practiced by the farmers. This is a formal system where the seeds are produced by only specialists.
The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and AGRA, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, are using their influence to push for seed privatization on the continent. They fund and advise institutions that lobby African governments to pass these laws. This enables seed companies to enter the scene, generating more profits and more corporate support for AGRA. At the same time, programs funded by the Gates Foundation and AGRA push farmers to use these privatized seeds through field demonstrations, seed giveaways, media promotions, and credit. These methods lock in new consumers before later charging regular market prices. In some cases, seed laws can even make it illegal for subsistence farmers to exchange seeds or save them for replanting, as they have done for generations. Corporate control of seed violates farmers' rights under international conventions and endangers people's livelihoods, increasing hunger and eroding cultural traditions. Advocates of seed privatization claim that seed laws and patents stimulate innovation and competition and help small entrepreneurs. They don't. People have been developing and improving seed varieties for at least 10,000 years, and researchers, crop breeders, and small-scale farmers have long worked together to develop well-adapted and nutritious varieties of seed using traditional knowledge. What seed privatization laws do is enable consolidation and monopoly control. 4 seed corporations now control over half of the global seed market. As a result, more than 75% of traditional seed varieties worldwide have gone extinct over the last century. While small-scale farmers use millions of unique plant species, agribusiness works with less than 200. This is a threat to resilience and biodiversity in the face of climate change. In Africa, climate change is expected to reduce food production capacity by as much as 20%, with hundreds of millions of people severely affected by droughts, heat waves, and other natural disasters. Faced with this dire outlook, African farmers are demanding more support for agroecology, a farmer-led solution to climate change and food security. Agroecology is an approach to farming that mimics and preserves ecosystems. This includes growing diverse crops, applying compost and manure to improve soil fertility, and avoiding expensive, toxic fossil fuel-based inputs.
Nous avons constaté que les sols qui reçoivent sur plusieurs années des graines qui sont enrobées dans des produits chimiques, ces sols petit à petit se dégradent. Pourquoi? Parce que à chaque fois, il faut mettre de nouveaux produits chimiques pour sauver la plante. Donc, au fur et à mesure, le sol va perdre sa capacité microbiologique et le sol va commencer à mourir.
As our climate continues to change, agroecology helps farmers adapt. For example, by enhancing drought-resistant food production systems. It combines research, innovation, and experimentation with local and indigenous knowledge. And because it is grounded in principles of social justice, agroecology ensures that farmers, not multinational corporations, are in control of food production. The evidence is clear. Agroecology works. Time and again, scientific studies demonstrate that agroecology increases yields and provides healthy and sustainable diets while decreasing input costs and boosting farm profitability. The Gates Foundation has spent billions of dollars and funded thousands of projects on chemical inputs and gene technologies at universities, research institutes, and companies around the world, but has funded only one project explicitly focused on agroecology. And it is the primary funder of the Cornell Alliance for Science, which has launched smear campaigns against agroecology and its proponents, while advocating aggressively for GMOs. Yet, GMOs are not the silver bullet they're often made out to be. After decades of costly investments and lofty promises, companies and researchers have consistently failed to produce successful drought-tolerant GMO crops that can assist in adaptation to climate change. By contrast, climate-adapted seeds developed through quicker and cheaper traditional breeding practices are already being grown and exchanged by farmers. Plus, only a handful of crops have been genetically modified, and they are the ones often grown for industrial uses, such as soybeans, maize, and cotton. These GMO crops are extremely dependent on expensive fossil fuel-based fertilizers, and in some cases result in increased use of toxic pesticides.
And actually, who is feeding the world despite this growing population? And the level of production that we are having is not because biotechnology, it's because that people have been resisting the resilience on relying on the agroecological system that they have been feeding themselves. From the food crisis in 2008, where Mali was producing about 2.8 million tons of cereal at that moment, now we are producing up to 9 million tons of cereal in my country. And the population growth, if you look at the trend of a population growth, we are producing more, and there is no single GM seed in my country.
Donc, vous voyez que nous partons de façon très, très simplifiée des éléments de la génétique. Mais au fur et à mesure que nous simplifions, nous nous rendons compte que nous affaiblissons notre réponse face à d'autres problèmes qui naissent. Et ces problèmes ne sont pas simplifiés. Nous nous simplifions et nous nous rendons compte que la nature ne simplifie pas. Et progressivement, la science s'est rendue compte que notre démarche est une démarche erronée. Il faut entrevoir une autre démarche, essayer de copier la nature, comment la nature réagit et nous montre des solutions et comment nous aussi nous pouvons nous adapter à cela. C'est tout le fondement de l'agroécologie.
Through agroecology, farmers come together to provide nutritious food for their communities. This improves health and furthers regional economic development.
Because agroecology promotes the continuation or the improvement of soil, production is continuous. The other net effect is that the reduction of these non-communicable diseases or other diseases that are linked to the excessive use of toxic pesticides would go down, and communities would reduce their cost of healthcare.
Land is the foundation of agroecology. You cannot grow food if you do not have land. You cannot grow food if you don't understand your soil. And that is where now, for example, when you go to farmers' communities, we hold something called, in Kiswahili, it's called tafakari. Tafakari is a Kiswahili word for reflection. So basically, it's bringing farmers together.
Imagine having a population of people that can depend on themselves, right? You're producing the food that you need to eat, that to keep you alive you need, and for your community, and even, at big percentage.
For our societies to withstand the effects of climate change and ensure food security, we must develop food systems that work for people and the planet. Agroecology allows people to control their own food and sustain their livelihoods. But only a small handful of philanthropic foundations fund it, compared to the huge amounts of funding that billionaire philanthropists devote to false solutions and harmful practices, like increased use of chemical inputs. Bill Gates and other wealthy philanthropists claim to care about solving poverty and hunger, but they are refusing to fund solutions that work. They envision a future where farming is done by robots and drones on large plantations. These technologies will not deliver accessible food for all, and they do not help us meaningfully adapt to climate change. Instead, they feed the agribusiness industry's voracious appetite for more profits built on farmers' labor, land, and seeds. It's time to demand a change. From Kenya to Cuba to India to Iowa, farmers are growing healthy and nutritious food, rebuilding ecosystems, and developing innovative ways to cope with a hotter and transformed world. Turning away from industrial agriculture and investing in agroecology has never been more urgent.
All right, so thank you for joining us for the films. I just want to clarify also that this is basically a spliced version or cut of five distinct short films. So the film series was designed as 5 films that are between 5 and 10 minutes, depending on the film. So if you'd like to watch each film in full, please, again, go to the website, richappetitesfilm.com. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. We have 3 people who are very active in the African food sovereignty movement. With us today, Mamadou Goïta from the Institute for Research and Promotion of Alternatives in Development, or IRPAD, Francis Davies from Zambia Alliance for Agroecology and Biodiversity, and Mariam Mayet from the African Center for Biodiversity in South Africa. So first of all, I'd like to thank all of you, the three of you, for joining us. And I'm going to ask each panelist to tell us a little bit about what's happening in kind of their country and regional contexts as it relates to the film. So if we could hear first from you, Mamadou, could you tell us a little bit about kind of how you see some of these issues coming up in your work in Mali?
Thank you very much, Ashley. Thanks, Heather, and have a good recovery, and all the panelists and participants. It's really a very great pleasure for me to contribute to this discussion. Can you hear me well? Okay, thank you very much. So I will be very brief so that we can allow some exchange with the participants. Just to recall that the film has highlighted very important issues on AGRA and the process. And since I've been part of this document that have been published on the false promises that AGRA has been doing, we have been investigating and finding data, but also cross-cutting some of the information that has been highlighted here. And then the conclusion that is clear actually that what we had as threats at the very beginning and what we have been denouncing since 2006, individually and collectively, happened despite all the advices that we have been doing and then all the fight we have been doing. Just to recall, for the case of Mali, already 2006, the same year that they were trying to plan for AGRA, we had what we call the Agricultural Orientation Law. That was a national process led by farmers' organization as a orientation law that already highlighted in 4 different chapters the issue of agroecology as a solution for our food system first. Secondly, that our agricultural system, fishing, but also the cattle and the like, should be based on family farming system. And that the family farms are the key pillar of our food production system, 2006. And there were some commitment to work on some individual issues, specific issues related to agroecology, mainly on seed issue, land, but also access to water and the like, just to highlight this as key problematic issue that need to be controlled by farmers. This is the reason why in 2007, early 2007, the Food Sovereignty Forum took place in Yeleni Center at Selenge with the participation of more than 800 people all over the world, all the continent, just to discuss about the principles of food sovereignty in the country. And some of the testimonies can be done on this process, but just to highlight that a few months after this Yeleni conference, we organized also a very important meeting that we call the Agroecological Alternatives to AGRA. Because some of us, like me, in 2006 already, and before just the Yeleni Center meeting, we have been coming across this initiative from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation. And we have been challenging in 2006 during a contradictory debate. First in Ottawa with Roy Stenner, who was the vice president of AGRA, but director of agriculture of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And also with Gary Thompson, a few months later on in New York, in a contradictory debate myself with Eric Holt-Givens. And I just decided in conclusion saying that I will never have discussion on AGRA out of my continent because the debate is there. They want to invade our continent and we need to have these meetings in the country. So just to be brief, we organized in November 2007 and a meeting that we call the Agroecological Alternatives to AGRA. 2007, a few months after the Yeleni Center, Mariam Mayet is one of the participants to this meeting, very important, and we made the decision. And some of the initiatives that came later on are from this process. We decided to have a working group, including Mariam Mayet and Via Campesina, Ropa, and others. And we continue just to bring our strength together to push back with AGRA. They never even send people to us. Instead of asking for working on our agenda, they continue to work on their own agenda, but they want to bribe some of us just to get involved in this. Austria and Salzburg, Mariam Mayet was also there. With myself, we are four of the social movement present in that launch of AGRA, trying to push back what they were doing and calling them just to stop this process. So we had Salzburg. After that, we had also Bonn meeting. On the COP meeting, we have been challenging them, and we had also Luxembourg with a contradictory debate with the current president of African Development Bank, who has been a leading a person on AGRA afterward and organizing the Dakar 2 forum that is completing what happened as a shameful meeting on the UN forum on food system. So this just to say that there have been a fight in this continent trying to challenge this, because we were sure that they will be just pushing this agriculture in another door. And then after all that, we have been contributing to change policies. In the case of Mali, finally we had achieved the drafting of a land policy that is respectful of farmers' access and security on land. We are working on a seed policy also that is now recognizing not only farmer seed, but also putting it forward, because 73% of the seed that is used in my country are farmer seed. Recognizing this and pushing it in a policy has been a very good step of a fight that has been done by farmers group. Just to end up, so there have been internationally many different processes coming out of this process. I can talk about, we have a solution with women access to land, to seeds, and fighting for the right. But also AFSA process started also from this very important meeting. And actually in Mali, we have engaged in a national policy drafting on agroecology. This is something that has been obtained by farmers groups for all the social movement, and also subsidizing organic manures and all the like are also processes that can say that we have been achieving and pushing back AGRA, not in fighting just with their name, but fighting not only against them, but fighting for defending agroecological perspective. So I will stop here just to say that the fight continues, because they never give up. They are trying to come with another door, and then all these processes that you have been going through, there are many people here who can just testify that it was a very strong fight, and then we'll succeed, because facts have demonstrated that that this work that has been done by AFSA, by Copagen, that was the leading organization in West Africa for this process, have come to some extent to push back this initiative vis-a-vis social movement. So I will stop here. Sorry to be a bit long. The historical background is very useful to understand where we are coming from and where we are today.
Thank you so much, Mamadou, for that context. I will turn it over now to Francis to tell us a little bit about what's going on in Zambia.
Thank you so much. I hope that you can hear me fine. That's great. So greetings, everyone, and it's really wonderful to be here with this community of people present and with leaders like Mariam and Mamadou. Thank you. It was actually ACB that helped and led our first research in Zambia uncovering the Green Revolution Take One in Zambia. So they really have been leading this fight in the Southern African region. I was asked to say something from Zambia for the screening just because it provides a useful case study of the predictably tragic false promises of the Green Revolution here, of the wide spectrum of actors, some knowing and others not knowing, that have been roped into the web of corporate capture of our Zambian food system, and the results of these ill-fitted, toxic techno-fixes and widespread malnutrition, soil infertility, and biodiversity wastelands, and the broken lives that have been left behind because of it. So AGRA admitted to us that in fact, that they have failed, that they were heavily criticized, and so had to change their strategy. And yet what we are seeing unfolding now is not the reform and apology to Africa that we deserve. It's a renewed push for an even deeper extraction of the very life base of Africa. The sheer arrogance, lies, and greed that continues to push the strategy onto Africa is so complete, it's at times unbelievable. I really find these films helpful to depict all the pieces of the puzzle that have been so fundamentally imposed onto Africa and integrated into our own policies and our government's mechanisms. So historically, Zambia was not actually an agri-focused country. Knowing, and we've been told that the strong resistance to GM, that the country had to GM technologies. And so the Green Revolution was strategically pushed through multiple pooled resources, largely public funding, as we know, and directed by US aid and targeted agri-funded programs. They embedded a web of agribusiness sales outfits across every rural town in the country, linking young entrepreneurs to corporate seed and pesticide companies. They funded startup seed companies and NGOs to capture Zambia's plant genetic resource base. They funded research grants, masters, PhDs, leadership training, PR, public speaking courses, you name it. Exactly what's been depicted in the films. They also pushed the harmonization of our seed trade laws, effectively rendering farmer seed systems illegal. They combined this, which is really interesting, with the wider web of influence that has been working over the last 20 years to reposition Zambia's stance on GMOs. So through USAID supports to the COMESA biotechnology program, the African Seed and Biotechnology Program platform of the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, funding to the African Network of Biosafety Experts. We have effectively been presented with an entire new biosafety policy suite, complete with a promotional gene editing communication strategy. And the current controversy and huge public outcry over the importation of GM-containing maize meal into Zambia versus the diametrically opposed ongoing promotional industry spin by our National Biosafety Authority and their scientific committee is the evidence of the US's long-term strategy to shift Zambia's biosafety position. So this was AGRA Take One in Zambia, and it failed to benefit Zambia and Africa's smallholder farmers. But it did successfully achieve its more subtle objective of capturing our policies. And now we have AGRA Take Two, it seems. In 2020, AGRA was tasked to support the Ministry of Agriculture here in Zambia and the government to develop a revised National Agricultural Investment Plan, building on the lessons of the comprehensive reviews of the first investment plan. And this explicitly states it must take into consideration Zambia's commitments to its people and to the international community, prioritizing nutrition, livelihoods, biodiversity, and addressing the core drivers of climate change. This is fundamentally about unsustainable agriculture and land use practices. So that was AGRA's task. Instead, farmers, consumers, we were all blindsided by the presentation of a suite of 85 new policy instruments and an agricultural transformation agency disguised in a proposal for the Comprehensive Agriculture Transformation Support Program, which will supersede current ministries, technical officers, and constituted governance processes to enable explicitly the private sector, lock in intellectual property regimes, digital agriculture, genetic engineering, and privatization of land and resources. Smallholder farmers are mentioned nowhere in the presented framework. So we raise this now as a clear example of the web of neo-colonial power, so completely working to capture our governance spaces and control, from the United Nations, food, climate, carbon, data, and trade capture, to the African Development Bank, to our heads of states, compacts on food sovereignty, and how this then plays out on the ground. Many dedicated government officers and young leaders are being lied to about the false promises of the new era of digital agriculture et al., and the renewed facade of extraction of our continent. So as our Zambia and Continental Campaign goes, My Food is African, in celebration and defense of Africa's food systems. Smallholder farmers, diverse seeds, shared ceremonial meals, and vibrant food markets are the basis of who we all are and our social ecological relationships and livelihoods. And in fact, the basis of all cultures until they were modernized and industrialized and lost. So we are really grateful to the Global Community for Food Sovereignty, the Community Alliance for Global Justice, AGRA Watch and your team and partners for this ongoing work that really does connect the dots of this insidious web of actors and how we all can connect working locally and globally for the real transformation of our food systems for food, climate, and ecological justice. So thank you. Hand over to Mariam.
Thank you so much, Francis. So yes, I'd love to turn it over now to Mariam to tell us both about how you see some of these interests and related institutions operating both in South Africa and at the regional level of the African Union and other regional bodies. Mariam, you're muted. If you could unmute, please.
Yes.
Thanks.
Good morning, good evening, everyone. It really is a great pleasure for me to be with you all today. And thank you especially to CAGJ. I got it right this time, Heather. And our friends from AGRA Watch. We've been friends for a very long time. Thank you very much for the Rich Appetite series, as well as your tireless campaigning against Gates, AGRA Watch, and also your sincere solidarity with us in Africa. It is wonderful to be sharing this panel with my friends and colleagues, Mamadou and Francis. I would like to pick up on the neo-colonialism that Francis has mentioned. So I want to talk not just about South Africa, but about the African continent. But first, I want to say that it is certainly urgent work needed to dismantle the stranglehold of essentially a corporate food regime that is deeply entrenched, complex, and also interconnected with other systems that are based on a paradigm of infinite growth. And in reality, it's feeding off its own existence. And many people have written about it and calling it the cancer stages of capitalism, which is now doubling down and accelerating dispossession and extraction. However, be cognizant of the subordinate role that Africa has in the global economy. So discussions about the future of food must take into account the broader entrenched neo-colonial structures and economic patterns at play, geared towards the impoverishment of the African continent and the reliance on Western sources of funding, not confined only to the obscene amount of money that Gates has amassed and other philanthro-capitalists, but also taking into account the permanent debt crisis and the dependency by Africa on the West. So the first thing to mention is that despite dramatic changes in the global economy since the 1960s, when most African countries gained independence, and in particular regarding the rise of the global food regime from the 1960s onwards, neo-colonial structures have remained intact on the continent. And we have to bear in mind that this includes not only US imperialism, but the imperialism of the West over 5 areas of human life. This includes finance, resources, science and technology, weapon systems, and information. So the question then for us in terms of our work concerning the future of food, and many of us are very strong advocates for a just transition towards agroecology. The question is, is it about transforming the world that capitalism has shaped in the last century? Or is it much broader than this? Is it about a transformation that will benefit humanity and the planet? Or will it simply be a rearrangement of forces and playing musical chairs about who controls the global economy and about global hegemony? So I think that these are some of the questions of our time. And while we all support a transition towards agroecology, we also believe that it requires a rethink of food systems in the context of reconceptualizing what so-called development entails. What does growth entail? The global terms of trade, and especially finance capitalism. And we need to strive towards ensuring ecological balance and meeting human needs so that every human being on the planet lives a meaningful life. And this has to be situated within discussions concerning local solutions and local economies. And this will entail the decoupling from the power of capital and the narrow demands of global, local, regional economic elites, and place our ecosystems and communities at the center of democratic thinking for a sustainable future. So I think that many of us work very closely with smallholder farmers, and our I wouldn't say fears, but I would say that our concerns are very much about the future of small-scale farmers on the continent. And we know that they contribute, as Mamadou has said, hugely to feeding the world. But they do so with less resources. And we know also that the best conserved areas in the world are territories of under the control and autonomy of indigenous people and local communities, and that smallholder farmers are indeed the custodians of genetic and cultural biodiversity, essential for current and future food sovereignty. So I'll leave it there, because I just think that our just transition and our work on agroecology has to be much more political, and it has to be placed within this broader context of our critique of the cancer stages of capitalism and this false paradigm of infinite growth, and our need to ensure that we reclaim our historical and lost relationship with nature. So I'll leave it there, and maybe later on I could take some more questions.
Thank you so much, Mariam. So we have kind of two prepared questions that we'd like to lead with, and then we'll open it up to audience questions for our panelists. So the first question we have is that sometimes these things can seem very policy-oriented and kind of far removed from the lives of ordinary people. So I would love for the three of you to kind of tell us what you think are the kind of real world stakes of these debates, and what do they mean for farmers, but also just for everyday people in Africa, and why should folks who don't otherwise follow some of these policy debates care about these issues and these actors? So anyone can jump in. Any one of you?
Yeah, I'll go and then follow. Oh, Francisco, you can go. Okay. No, I think that there is a big change. So I'm really proud and happy to see what all this fantastic work that has been done by people in different parts, and the different networks that have been set up have been contributing a lot to sensitize people and then give them the right information and pushing them, because sometimes we are just fighting against AGRA And in Bamako meeting, we decided to say, okay, we are doing too much publicity for AGRA. Let's just move what we can do. So this is where we call it the agroecological alternative to AGRA, and we change it to we are the solution. The solution that we have on agroecological perspective, fighting with nature, and then trying to fix the system itself is where we should go. And then we have been then using a lot of things involving people in the policy debate, and then asking them to request, to demand to decision makers to make decisions on recognizing farmer seeds, just refusing to introduce GM seeds in the countries, but also pushing for recognizing the family farming system as a key driver of the food system in our countries. And all the debate that AFSA has been organizing at different level, at country level, case studies and the like. So today, I think that there are more people mobilized behind this policy debate than we had 10 or 20 years ago, back, if you go back. And first, secondly, I think that people have been showcased that in the wrong direction, and there is no change. If you don't just change our mindset, we don't change the system, we don't fight against the good causes of what is happening actually, we will never succeed to create conditions for sustainable structural changes that we wanted to do. So, and I think that there's more connection today between different networks and different groups. That is also one of the key drivers of this new situation that we have actually. And the debate is open. We have been talking all the languages, we have been defending positions, but also people have been doing what they can do, what they should do, and what needs to be done just to make it happen. So the debate is still going on, but there is more and more people fighting for farmers' rights, but also to respect the international commitment of different institutions.
Yeah, thanks, Mamadou. I mean, I don't have anything specifically more to add. I mean, I think just it's really wonderful to also hear from Mamadou that there is, when people do connect the dots, then there really is significant pushback when the realization of the extent of the neo-colonial control that is happening through this layer of policy influence, and policymakers are really, really supportive. And there's a very, very clear understanding of what is at stake. We've seen the implications of history, and we presented some of these films recently to our parliamentarians, and there was real gratitude for them and for these conversations. And understanding of the complexity of dealing with the biggest thing is the debt burden that our countries face, and how we tackle that, and then overcoming the challenges, multiple challenges that we face, and the complex challenges. But people, farmers, the strength of citizens on the ground is pushing back. And I really do feel like that is getting stronger, definitely in Zambia. Mariam and Mamadou, you've been working on this for a lot longer than I have. So Mariam, please do share your thoughts. We've seen the changes.
No, look, the first thing is we have to acknowledge that working classes, including precarious workers, the peasantry, globally have been depleted by the process of globalization, multiple crises and shocks, and recently the pandemic. In the context of the food systems, we have to admit that frontline communities are finding it enormously difficult to maintain their strength and resiliency in the context of democratic systems being taken over by money power, as has been described in the Rich Appetite series. Nevertheless, across the African continent and also across the global south, social movements are innovating and engaging robustly with transformative politics and practices. So the agency of social movements must be recognized. And this does include innovating alternatives like agroecology, food hubs across South Africa. This has been a very big area of work. Food commons in frontline communities, neighborhoods, and villages, also in the global north. Particularly, we've seen this during the pandemic, and also those fighting to protect and democratize land, water, and resource rights on the political front. So I think that it's not all gloom and doom, but we are in a David and Goliath battle. And it is very difficult to maintain hope in these times when one does take into account the multiple crises, particularly the extent to which our oceans, our soils, our rivers, lakes have been polluted, the extent of the global injustices, the inequalities, the wars, the conflicts, the migration of people, the human suffering. But I think we need to continue our work. All of us must continue our work. We all play an important role in this movement towards a just transition that may not be realized in our lifetime, but we have to at least build on the good things that are there so that the future generations will have at least something to build on going forward. And so I don't want to leave this platform on a negative note, but at least to say and recognize that we are all there. And the solidarity across movements across the global north and south really, it's very important in that we must continue and deepen our alliances and our solidarity and continue in this moment of scarce resources also to build stronger alliances between the global south itself and between the global south and the global north. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mariam, and all of our panelists. And that actually is a great segue into our next question, which is essentially about kind of what people are doing and what avenues forward there are for social movements and for food sovereignty. So Mariam kind of already introduced a lot of these ideas, but we're wondering just kind of, given how dense and powerful these kind of organizations and institutions and corporations are, this can seem really daunting and overwhelming. And, some people might want to just cry in a corner. But of course, how do we go forward? And so we would invite the panelists to reflect a little on how you approach that, kind of what avenues forward do you see or exciting opportunities for national and transnational movement building to fight this. So would someone like to respond?
Yeah, I can just go. I think that we are just going from very scattered movement and network to very interactional ones, actually. So we are creating conditions for more exchange. We know more what we do, and it's not just participating to where people are inviting us, but people are creating spaces for dialogue and then interacting. We are not really afraid of challenging people on their own ground. A lot of research that is going on. So we have to go through evidences. We understood that. This is one key point for us to have evidences, to have educational tools like you have been doing for this, and then that the maximum of African networks and movement can be aware of what is happening. Some of the farmers group have been pulling the horse for a long time and have been really very instrumental. All the Labia Campesina members, now you look at the regional farmers groups who has been very progressist in their thinking, but also some very highly qualified persons as researchers, very progressive, who have been leading some of the research work that has been done in this continent. So I think that the first step is to ensure that we are sharing information and that with different tools that we have are accessible to a maximum. So now we cannot do only instrument for intellectual or for just those who are called who have not been to school or the like. We have all our instruments should be accessible, or you transform them to make them accessible to some extent, making them in different languages and the like. So the first step is really sharing information, doing a lot of research. This is a connection with academic world, activists, but also those who are really living situations. In this synergical way of working is very also instrumental to the progress that we can make. And there are very progressive citizens also within the decision-making bodies. Parliament, we have been working a lot with parliamentarians. We have been working a lot with some of the, if I listen to what is happening in Uganda, listening to some of the parliamentarians against what is going on. Look at what is happening even in Kenya, where people have been trying to engage them in some of the pathways, and they are fighting against it. So this means that bringing people together is very important, creating conditions, and the not but least thing is also to create conditions for our fight. There is a lack of resources. There are not too many organizations that are committed to support. You look at agroecological funding system, actually, you cannot avoid talking about it. How can we bring public resources to be invested on it? How are we fighting just to make it also research more funded on our agenda, but with public resources? It's a key challenge, and we need really to work on that. This is the future of where we are going. And if we want to work on farmer seeds, we need really to have public resources on that. And then pushing back this private sector that is really destabilizing our system, or the whole system of the world, with evidences needs also to be supported financially speaking, but also with materials like what the one we are doing that is costly, and how are we bringing resources together, mutualizing our resources so that we can just move forward. The future will be on mutualizing resources, more resources for agroecological perspective, because we are talking about upstream and downstream. We talk about agroecology, we are not talking about the food system itself and how people are consuming it, how people are processing this food, and to maintain the system in the cities and the like. So we are just doing something that is really marginalized per se, and this is not a good way of looking at it. So for me, we need to look at information, we need to look at capacity building, synergical meetings like AFSA is organizing, like Copagen is organizing, like EBN is organizing, like other national network like the Kenyan biodiversity groups, etc., biological groups are organizing, and to make it happen. And here, this is where we go. We cannot move alone, just move together, and then to ensure that we are also impacting and bringing on board parliamentarians, municipalities, the mayors of the cities have the big role to play today in the structural change at the local level. Let's invite them, not creating just a kind of two-word. Some of them can be influenced and then bring their contribution to the process.
Thank you, Mamadou. I don't know if I can add to that. And Mariam, if you wanted to come in, it's just that my camera's on. But yeah, I think, I mean, our democratic spaces at global level have been captured and used against us. And so we're creating different alternative spaces, and people are gathering in the most incredible ways, as has been described, across previous boundaries, across the continents, and yeah, within our national territorial spaces. And in a sense, the shift from the focus on an agricultural revolution to a food system revolution has actually actually galvanized the movement, because it's just brought more and more people together. And citizens are seeing what was previously the very deliberate divide between agriculture for commercial productivity business, agriculture as a business, as it's called in Zambia, and the break that actually agriculture is about food and about who we are, and people are reconnecting those and reclaiming control of our food and who we are, which is fundamentally about our seeds and control of our own land and production. And I'm very, very grateful for the farmers that I work with who do that and who feed me beautiful, nutritious food. And we are really gathering around that and really galvanizing in local communities and across spaces. As Mariam said, though, is going back to those local spaces, and it's about local food clubs, hubs and communities that are connecting at local and national level. So I think it's, happening. I don't know whether I should respond just very briefly to, there was a question in the, oh, Mariam, please come in.
Yeah, that's it. I know Mariam kind of already addressed this, so if you'd like to add anything before we jump into the audience questions, and you're muted. Mariam, are you there? You're still muted, Mariam.
Still in the pandemic mode. No, I think that we must all struggle at all levels wherever we have agency, and I think that we are going to be continuously confronted with ever new iterations of, a spate of market-based solutions to deal with the multiple crises. So in the food crisis, energy, biodiversity, and we're going to have to continue to struggle against these. And these are now taking the form of, biodiversity offsetting, net zero loss, nature-based solutions, and so on, litany of these things. But I also think that we need to support work on the ground and to ensure that we respond to the key demand made by African food movements, and it's a consistent demand that they be recognized as significant role players in securing livelihoods, food and nutrition sovereignty across the continent, and that their farmer seed systems be recognized. So I think that a lot of us are supporting agroecology. I think that these are noble efforts, but agroecology is also very sexy, even for our capitalist friends. And so that it's going to be interpreted in different ways. And we have to be very alive to this. And as long as we insist that it is about a fundamental change in power relationships and our relationships with nature, and it's just not about farming practices, and that it's inherently about sovereignty, autonomy. It is not at all embedded in neocolonialism. It's essentially about ecological sustainability, social justice, and it has red lines. And these red lines are about no to any genetic modification, no to genome editing, no to agrochemicals, no to technological lock-in. So we have to be very clear about the red lines, in as much as we have to be clear about what we're struggling towards as a just transition. So I'll leave it there, and I don't know if Mamadou maybe wants to add anything more to that, or Francis.
I think actually thank you, Mariam. Yeah, I think we should jump into the audience questions. So there's a question about what can the media do to amplify the work that you folks are doing and make it relevant to ordinary citizens and small scale farmers. So what do you envision as the role of the media? Oh, Mamadou, you're muted.
I think we already mentioned part of it. This kind of information that you gave in a few minutes. Having this fantastic film, highlighting some of the data, including also what media can do in using different channels just to inform people, but also exchange on create conditions for exchanging on the research data and the like is very instrumental. I think that all the networks understood very, very quickly that we cannot move forward if we were to just endorsing what we are doing by measures. You look at Copagen has been training more than 200 journalists from different kind of media in West Africa very early, since 2009, just to spread the information. Actually, there is a very strong group of media with AFSA. They are participating to all the meetings. They are doing their best to share information. They are creating conditions for sharing what is going on at AFSA level. And actually, most of these media persons have been very instrumental in creating conditions to make some case studies well known, but not only well known, but also taken into account by some decision makers. So it's really obvious that there is no fight. We cannot win any of this fight if media are not involved. They have to be very creative so that not only for those who have not been to school or the like can understand the key messages that are sometimes very complicated. We have complex issues actually related to all these new technologies, and then we have conditions to fight and to make them understand how to make things like GMOs being understood by people at the farm level. So this is what we try to do with media, because they have the strongest messages and the way to make them much more easier to be understood than to share with people. So media is very, very instrumental to our fight. There is no fight if you don't have good conditions for sharing information and then also putting it in face of decision makers and other players. So it's very instrumental to that sense. Transforming positively the messages to make them available, but also making it available for those who are very far from the decision or the discussion spaces that we are having.
Thank you, Mamadou. Francis or Mariam, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I just that it's really exciting that there's a very big wide network of media agencies and progressive journalists who are coming together now to really take up the struggle with the food sovereignty and justice movements around the world. So I would really suggest, Kennedy, thanks for being here. Share the films, connect with us in Zambia level, and I mean at global level there's a Growing Cultures Global Peasants and Indigenous Peoples Press Forum, and there are media agencies, top incredible media agencies and journalists who join that press forum whenever it happens. So it's really, really critical, and I think that's what is shifting dialogue and narrative at Zambia level, is people are beginning to piece together the different pieces of this puzzle. So thanks for being here and your question. It's really important. Keep in touch. I'll put the links in the chat.
Thank you. So we do need to wrap up. If you had a question, I know there were a number of questions that we didn't get to. We would love to invite the panelists and folks with questions to stay on an extra couple of minutes after we wrap up, if you'd like to get your questions addressed. And just to conclude, thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our panelists for bringing your wisdom and your insight and your experience into this space and letting us learn from you and sharing with us. We want to just plug again to learn more about some of the issues behind the films and the kind of analysis and research. Please check out the companion guide. So this is, you can't really see, it's a blurry version of the print version. And Heather is going to drop some of the links to the individual companion guides in the chat. The fifth one is available as a PDF, but we're going to upload it to the website soon. So keep post it or keep looking back for that. To learn more and follow our work as AGRA Watch and CAGJ, please sign up for our e-newsletter, which we'll drop a link in the chat for that as well. And it's also CAGJ's membership month this month. So we would love to invite all of you to become members and support CAGJ and AGRA Watch's work going forward, so we can keep working in this movement and uplifting sustainable and agroecological alternatives. So with all of that being said, thank you again to everyone.
Ashley,
Yeah.
just one small point, because we didn't answer to Michael's point on the forum, Dakar forum meeting. I think there is a good space actually at the CFS level with the civil society mechanism and indigenous people mechanism that is trying to work on both the pathways and the compact and analyze them in the sense of creating critical analysis on the coherence between what social movements are doing and this instrument. So probably there is the people just realize that it was fooling people, that African Development Bank, because of his leadership with Akin Adesina, who was the vice president of AGRA, and all his way in his country as a minister of agriculture, cannot lead a food system in our continent. So it's really difficult actually to have this kind of meeting. You cannot prevent them, but you can fight just to make sure that at country level, there is something happening to avoid this kind of hijacking again our system by a compact that is really, or a pathway that will be very instrumental in creating again what we have been fighting against for a long time. So the answer can be in the hands of AFSA, fighting against what is happening there, against in the hands of Copagen, ABN, and all the network that are here, but also doing this kind of research that we want to do actually. Francis is involved in it. I'm coordinating this team that will be working on that and trying to see what are the policy brief that we can just work on against this kind of meeting that is really a shame for our continent.
Okay, great, thank you. So yeah, if folks want to stay on a little and chat with the panelists a bit more, we invite you to. And otherwise, thank you everyone for coming, and have a great rest of your day or evening.
Thanks, everyone.